I'm now on camera, and
Yes.
yes,
I see you, James.
thank you. Wonderful. And welcome to the Duwamish Longhouse. And today we are very proud to introduce the new book by B.J. Cummings, The River That Made Seattle. And as you all should know, that B.J. and I have a long connection with each other, and it has been an important connection in protecting Seattle's only river. And I am working my way through the book, and I must tell you that after 2 or 3 pages, I have to pause to digest the information that she's put together. Not because it's all new, because it's put together in a new way. And as far as the tribe is concerned, and I know that Cecile would agree with me, who is our tribal chair, that this book is a very important book, that the information here talks about the Indian Wars in a completely different way, that tells you the reasoning behind what happened. And I would also say that it is incredibly important that people take the time to read the footnotes, because BJ has been very meticulous on the information that she has put into the book. Just as DRCC, when she was in charge and we maintain today, everything is factual. There is no question about what she's saying. And so, number one, welcome to the Duwamish Longhouse. The Longhouse and Cultural Center is an important thing to Duwamish people. Push myself back a little bit here, and hopefully you can see that the Longhouse itself is a post and beam structure, which is what our longhouses were made of. And the benches around the outside will really will for people who are, trying to sit down, but this is where our people used to sleep. Our floor actually is a story of the tribe. Now, I hope you're going to another feed at this point. You will see thank you. You will see there are triangles on the edge of the floor. Now, I always, when I did my tours of our class, those triangles represent. Not do that. These are the mountain ranges on either side of the Duwamish Valley. On one side is the Cascades, on the other side is the Olympics. And in the middle, this is a star. The star represents Duwamish people who are in the middle of.
I'm going to bring the computer so we can hear you.
Starting from where?
From the beginning of the floor.
Okay. So I'm starting over just to make sure everybody can see and everything is important here in the Longhouse. The benches along the side of the Longhouse work really well for people to sit down for an event and that type of thing. But these are actually where people used to sleep in a Longhouse. The benches alongside the Longhouse are incredibly important. And if it was a full Longhouse, there would be fire pits in the middle, and there would be different curtains that would come down in between to be able to segregate off different apartments in the Longhouse. And as you get into the Longhouse, the most important people are at the end of the Longhouse, and the lower people are at the entrance of the Longhouse. But as we move through this, the floor in the Longhouse is very, very important because it actually describes the Duwamish tribe. On either side, you'll see what look like little pyramids, but what they are mountain ranges. To the east of us is the Cascade Mountains. To the west of us is the Olympic Mountains. And in between, this is a star in a vascular design. And that star represents Duwamish people who are between those two mountain ranges. And the design that comes out from the middle on either side. At first, I'm not sure that Mary Lou understood what that meant, but that was what she wanted to have here. And that is a fern design. Fern design, if you know anything about being in the woods and you get stung by a nettle bush, the first thing you need to reach for is a fern, because the fern will heal you. The fern is like our aloe vera, here. And what this place is about healing, not only for Duwamish people, which is very important, but also for anybody in our neighborhood and anybody who wants to come in. We want people to understand our story. And so with that, that is my welcoming to you here from the Longhouse. And if you have not been here, shame on you. And if you have, come back, because I want to see you again. I'm going to now transfer everything over to Ms. B.J. Cummings.
Terrific. Thank you so much, James, for welcoming me here today. Thank you also for hosting all of us joining from the greater Seattle area here on traditional Duwamish land. I think we're going to switch James's camera off. There we go. I'm deeply honored to be here at the Duwamish Longhouse for the release of The River That Made Seattle. And to all of you out there in Zoom land, thank you for joining us today. But what I really want to know is, why are you all here? Why be inside, online, for the release of a book about the history of a river that was all but forgotten just a generation ago? 25 years ago, almost no one in Seattle knew that we had a river here at all. Unless you worked in a factory along its shores, or maybe captained a barge or tugboat involved in shipping freight, the Duwamish River was all but invisible, and almost entirely ignored, except as a place to dump our waste. So why are you here now? I would guess that it's because in the last couple of decades, we've come to understand that the Duwamish River is a reflection of ourselves. What compels you to care about it? What is it that's keeping you inside to join in conversation with a couple of hundred other people who are online with us right now to reflect on the river's history? Why does this river matter to you? James Rasmussen, who is a central figure in this book, once answered that question by saying, "That's like asking me why my grandmother matters." Our family shapes us. Our places mold us. And our river tells us something about who we are. The Duwamish River is a living reflection of Seattle's history. It's central to the character of our city. It tells us a lot about who we are and about who we've been. After spending the last 2 decades getting to know this river and the resiliency of both its ecosystems and of its people, I think the story of the Duwamish also shows us a lot about who and what we can be. And I'm guessing that that's why we're all here today. I'd like to start off by sharing with you all an excerpt from the book about one of my first meetings with the Duwamish River. But I can't yet because I need to tell you a little backstory first. It's about an extraordinary woman, Cecile Hansen, née Maxwell, the chairwoman of the Duwamish tribe, and about a bend in this river that is directly across the road from the Longhouse where I'm sitting now. A bulldozer was churning up the ground where Cecile Maxwell's ancestral village had once stood. Maxwell, the great-grandniece of Chief Seattle, and the new chairwoman of the Duwamish tribe, had been visiting the site upriver of the West Seattle Bridge often. In the months leading up to this day, in early July 1976, she had frequently talked with the archaeology students, sifting through carefully excavated bores of black dirt speckled with shell and bone fragments. She was eager to learn about their finds and how they might affect her tribe's claims to land and fishing rights in the area. No students were working. Their project had been wrapped up, the grids and tools they'd been using in their research removed. The site had been quiet for several weeks, but today, a bulldozer was working the area where the students had meticulously documented fragments of bone, stone tools, and seashell deposits. Alarmed, Maxwell hurried back to her office and dialed the number for the Army Corps of Engineers. The previous fall, Maxwell had received a letter notifying her that the Army Corps had found evidence of a tribal settlement on land owned by the Port of Seattle. The Corps' archaeologist, David Munsell, had been reviewing an application from the port for a permit to fill a river bend that was left behind when the Duwamish waterway was constructed more than half a century earlier. The remnant branched sharply off the deep, straight shipping channel and looped west before arcing back to rejoin the constructed waterway half a mile downriver, or about a mile along the meander formed by the natural river bend. Since 1899, Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act had required a permit for any dredging, filling, or excavation in navigable waters of the United States. The entire Duwamish waterway had been constructed in the early 1900s under Section 10 permits. In 1975, the port moved to fill this last remaining river bend with an eye to adding more land along the Duwamish waterway, land that could be used to build a new marine terminal. The port's application was routine, but a new Washington state law declared a state interest in protecting archaeological resources for their historic and scientific value. The Corps of Engineers had never examined any Duwamish River sites for their archaeological value before. But the port's Terminal 107 property, which sat along the remnant stretch of river, was right across the channel from Munsell's office. He could see it from the windows of the Army Corps building. So, with the application in hand, he drove across the low West Seattle Bridge to take a look. Munsell passed the Seaboard Lumber Mill before turning into a small lot at Terminal 107. He parked his car and walked to a cluster of houses in the process of being demolished. To prepare for developing the property, the port was evicting the occupants of an entire neighborhood of modest homes that stretched along the riverbend. Some of the houses had already been removed, their shallow foundation pits exposed. Peering down at the layers of earth in one of the pits, Munsell immediately knew that he would not be approving the port's application. A swath of shell and bone fragments more than a foot deep cut across the face of the dirt, a classic midden or disposal ground of a type associated with prehistoric villages in coastal areas. The Port of Seattle's Terminal 107 had archaeological resources in abundance, lying bare for all to see. After this visit, the federal government shut down the Port of Seattle's construction project and required them to hire archaeologists to study the site. Despite this, the port ordered the demolition of several more houses right in the middle of the study area. That's what was happening when Cecile encountered the bulldozer. The archaeologists studying the site said that 80 to 90% of the remains were destroyed. Had that been all there was to the story, the riverbend would likely just be another marine terminal today. But fortunately, that's not all there was to the story. But you'll have to read the book to learn the rest of that one. I tell you about this because with that background to ground us in the significance of this place, I can tell you now about one of my own first visits to the river. Bear with me 1 second. I first saw the riverbend at Uliquat from a kayak in the spring of 1994, my center of gravity below the waterline as I cut through the narrow channel. A concave wall of ash-fine sand rose from the water on my left, binding together a layer of ancient clamshells still visible in the eroded bank. Belted kingfishers trilled as they skipped from tree to tree ahead of my boat, and a great blue heron skimmed low, flushed from the reeds on my right. Ahead, a mudflat extended around the bend, alive with speckled shorebirds scurrying along the water's edge. I felt I had passed into another time, one before barges and smokestacks and sewer grates. Just 10 minutes earlier, I'd been leading a team of kayakers along Seattle's concrete-lined Duwamish waterway in a training session for a citizen navy of sorts, ferreting out illegal dumping and industrial discharges fouling Seattle's waters. Airplanes and cranes cast shadows over the water, and the din of engines and machines drowned out our shouted attempts at conversation. Paddling with cameras and notepads tethered to our boats, we were searching for and finding unauthorized sources of pollution. I'd been on the Duwamish River only once before, with Lee Moyer, a former Boeing engineer who made a post-retirement career of designing and building kayaks. We had stuck to the wide shipping channel that day, getting familiar with the many factories and pipes that lined the waterway. The channel had been built straight, dredged deep, and lined with industrial berths. There was nothing natural about it. On this training day, I decided to hang a hard left after leading the volunteers past the last of a line of factories. With 20 minutes to kill before our session ended, I led the group behind the remnant of a small island that I hadn't visited before. The Serene Meander we found ourselves paddling along, and its sudden proliferation of wildlife was a revelation. It was here that Cecile Maxwell had encountered the bulldozers in 1976. Here, early American settlers had built a bustling neighborhood of gridded streets and fishing docks in the 1890s. And here, the Duwamish tribe had lived in a cluster of longhouses and hosted potlatches for over 1,000 years, leaving behind a dense detritus of clamshells. Maxwell's desperate call saved the last remaining bend on the Duwamish River, where we now floated at eye level with the seabirds. So that's the story of this particular place on the river, visible from the window of this longhouse. And it was the beginning of my relationship with the Duwamish River. I've now spent 20 plus years introducing as many people as I've been able to our river. And for those of you who have spent time here, I know that you have developed relationships of your own and have your own stories to tell. And for some of you who are joining us today, those stories are in this book. I'm going to switch gears now before we meet some of those people. If you would give me just one moment to share my screen. Okay. We're going to begin with a map of King County and the Duwamish Watershed in the 1800s. And to get you situated, right here, my little laser pointer is, this is downtown Seattle on the shores of what we call Elliott Bay. Lake Washington, Lake Sammamish, and to the south of us, the rest of the Duwamish River watershed. If we go all the way down to the south, we find the furthest reaches of the original Duwamish watershed, the headwaters of the White River at Mount Rainier. Following that down to the town that was called Slaughter. At this time, 1888, when this map was made, now Auburn, the Green River, which begins at Stampede Pass and flows down, joins the White. And then the combined Green and White River continue down to their junction with the Black River. Black River was very short, but drained the entire Cedar River watershed, as well as Lake Sammamish, the Sammamish River, all of Lake Washington, including its tributaries, which connected Green Lake here to Lake Washington, and then met the Cedar at the junction with the Black at an area that the settlers called Lake Fork. The Black then connected with the White, and from that point down, it was called the Duwamish River, or at that time, the Duwamish River, which emptied into Duwamish Bay. Even Lake Washington at that time was Lake Duwamish. Things changed as we began to re-engineer the waterway, as white settlers began to re-engineer the waterway to meet their needs. The White River in 1898 was diverted by farmers with dynamite so that it went down the narrow Stuck River Valley, which had been a small offshoot, connected with the Puyallup, and eventually flowed out to meet Puget Sound at Commencement Bay. In 1906, that change was made permanent and enforced by armed guards from King County to protect land that the King County's farmers no longer wanted flooded. Following the river down to the Black, in 1912, the Cedar River was prevented from directly connecting with the Black by a channel that drained it into Lake Washington to avoid flooding in the growing town of Renton. A few years later, in 1916, another channel was opened between Lake Washington and Lake Union, and a creek widened and deepened between Lake Union and Shilshole Bay in Puget Sound. When this happened, the entire Lake Washington dropped by about 7 feet, cutting off its connection to the Black River, which dried up entirely. After that time, the watershed was only the Green and Duwamish River. At the same time, we were making changes up here at the outlet of the Duwamish. Beginning in 1895, the open bay began to be transformed. In the early years of building out industrial corridors and rail lines, colonizers began to use the tidal mudflats to suspend elevated transportation corridors and build factory islands like this one here. The mudflats that they were built over were considered worthless and even pestilent by the early industrialists. One of these, Eugene Semple, created Harbor Island and its flanking waterways, and he boasted about his work filling the bay by writing, "On this land will be founded the major portion of the manufacturing industries of the city by making solid and substantial land where formerly there was water, the rising and falling of the tides, and occasionally bare and unsightly mudflats, which were a menace to the health of dwellers on the adjacent dry lands." He delivered on his promise. Today's Soto, Harbor Island, and West Seattle's marine terminals are a testament to his vision. From the original meandering course of the Duwamish River, below the historic Black River Junction, the tide flats were followed by a plan to straighten the entire Duwamish River and fill in its old meanders in order to build solid land to expand industry to the south of Seattle. The area that we're going to focus on now is the lower part of that Duwamish, this area right here. For a brief period after the river was straightened, the straightened waterway and the original river meanders coexisted, but that was very short-lived. Today, the original 12 miles of the lower Duwamish River has been channelized to a short 5-mile shipping canal. The location of the original river bend, on which Cecile protected the village site of Uliquat, is right here, once just at the open mouth of Duwamish Bay. Today, you can see it here. And because she was able to stop the filling of this last river bend, you see it here as well. It was once at the mouth of the river delta, but the bend is now a mile upriver of the constructed end of the shipping channel and its surrounding built-up industrial lands. To put the contemporary Duwamish River in perspective, I'm going to give you a little virtual tour of one of the original historic reaches of the Duwamish watershed. We're going to begin at the origins of the White River at Mount Rainier. And this is going to be a little choppy. Google Earth is getting better, but it's not perfect yet. Let's see. We're starting at Mount Rainier, at Emmons Glacier, which you can see here. Emmons Glacier was buried by a rock avalanche in the 1950s, I believe it was. And as a result, it's actually been protected from the melt that has been affecting, glaciers. I think I've frozen up here. Let me see if I can fix this. Just a moment. I'm gonna try to start this again, my apologies. Okay, Emmons Glacier, going under the rock avalanche that has actually been protecting it from melting. And at the end of the avalanche, there's an ice cave covered with rock that is the source of the White River, then and now. And you can see the White River emerging from that ice cave right here and flowing down the remainder of the avalanche. The White continues around the side of Mount Rainier and flows down to the town of Greenwater, which anybody has driven up there has probably passed through, where it's joined by the Greenwater River, which flows down from Natchez Pass, one of the locations that the early wagon trains of settlers took to get to Puget Sound. The White continues down past Enumclaw to what we now know as Auburn, where it once flowed north towards Seattle, but then was diverted, as we talked about, and now flows south towards the Puyallup and Commencement Bay. On the other side of Auburn, it used to be joined by the Green River. The Green River now still flows and is the only remaining headwaters for the Duwamish. As we go as we go downriver north from Auburn, the former White River flows through the town that took its name, the historic town of White River. And over the years, eventually the name was changed to the Green to reflect the fact that the White River had been diverted. So the Green continues until it meets the junction with the historic Black River. The Black River, remember, once drained the entire Lakes Sammamish, Lakes Washington, and Cedar River at this location. Today, it only drains a small amount of wetlands and the occasional overflow from the Renton Sewage Treatment Plant. We follow the Duwamish at that point down to the beginning of the straightened waterway at Turning Basin 3, and this is also the beginning of the Duwamish Waterway Superfund site. As we follow the straightened waterway, there's one small bend as we come by the Boeing Plant 2, where airplanes were being manufactured during World War II, and on the other side of the river, the old town, now neighborhood, of South Park. Following the straightened waterway, past Georgetown, which is now a largely industrial neighborhood built on the original Luther Collins land claim, which was one of the 3 first land claims in the entire Seattle region on the banks of the Duwamish. We follow the river to that one remaining river bend behind Kellogg Island at the historic village of Uliquat. And today, I am speaking to you from the Longhouse, directly across the street from Uliquat. That was the beginning of the open bay. All of the flat, low land that you see downriver from that is constructed land that we used in order to expand industry to fuel the growing city of Seattle. We have the West Seattle Marine Terminals, all of Harbor Island, which was the largest man-made island at the time it was built, and SoDo, including even parts of Pioneer Square and downtown Seattle, all on fill that was constructed land. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a scale. We could do the same with the Cedar. We could do the same with Lakes Issaquah and Washington, as well as with the remaining Green River that still does flow into the Duwamish. During the time that all these changes were taking place in the watershed, similarly dramatic changes were taking place among the river's Cuban communities. White colonial settlement turned the watershed's social landscape upside down. Before the first white settler put down roots in the current city of Seattle, as I mentioned, that occurred on the banks of the Duwamish River with the arrival of the Collins, Maple, and Van Asselt parties a few months before the famous Denny party arrived. Sebald, shown here, and his sister, Tukdalyub, were born to a Black River family in the village of Sababadid. They were highborn, or among the leadership class of the region's indigenous people, and Sebald became a healer, while his sister married a Skagit chief from Whidbey Island named Crus Canum. Canum later signed the Treaty of Point Elliott alongside Chief Seattle, and he and Tukdalyub had 2 daughters. Sebald later became known as Dr. Jack, or Uncle Jack to his family. Canum and Tukdalyub's daughter, Keolitsa, and her sister moved back from Whidbey Island, where their parents lived, to their mother's ancestral village at Spabadid on the Black River, just as the white pioneers were beginning to settle in their homelands. Her family's oral history says she was then kidnapped by the Yakima Nation and later escaped using a canoe and paddle she stole to make her way back home. She then later married a pioneer who opened the region's first coal mine, and after he died, she married another settler with whom she eventually moved with their family to Vashon Island. Nellie, their first daughter, was among the Puget Sound area's first generation of mixed native settler children. As a teenager, she returned to the Seattle area and wound up working in the home of Judge Thomas Burke, a well-known attorney and railroad booster, whose name is memorialized in the Burke Building downtown, and also the Burke-Gilman Trail, which follows the course of the railroad he helped build. It seems that Nellie learned a great deal about the law and about land transactions from Burke, and she may have helped her Uncle Jack secure homestead land in the 1890s on the Cedar River. It was the only such claim ever granted to a Duwamish person in their native homelands. Nellie also married a white immigrant to the territory in the late 1890s, with whom she had a son, Myron Overacker Jr., who was named for his father. After negotiating a series of land deals that helped gather her Duwamish family back together in their natal watershed, Nellie and her husband homesteaded on state-owned land on top of Beacon Hill overlooking Lake Washington. Myron Jr. was a child when the Duwamish River was being straightened and the tidelands turned into Seattle's industrial powerhouse. And when the level of the lake their home overlooked dropped by 7 feet. He wound up working in one of Harbor Island's first industries, the shipyard, later called Todd Shipyard on Harbor Island, and now called Vigor. He also was a founding member of the new Duwamish Tribal Council, which was organized under the governing US laws that were required at that time in order to carry on their tribal governance. By the time Myron Jr.'s daughter, Anne, was born, the Duwamish watershed's transformation was complete. And the population of Seattle had exploded and diversified. She grew up during World War II and remembered their Beacon Hill neighbor, Tadashi Yamaguchi, being taken away in 1941 and interred, along with the rest of his Japanese family. She raised her own son in the same house her grandparents had homesteaded and followed her father in serving on the Duwamish Tribal Council. In the photo here, she's holding the canoe paddle that Kiolitsa used to escape her abduction by the Yakamas. Anne's son, Chris Canum and Tupt Alyut's great-great-great-grandson, James Rasmussen, was born in 1955. You met him at the beginning of this event. To paraphrase from the book, 6 feet tall, James carried himself with pride. His hair is usually pulled back in a long ponytail, and in his younger days, he sported a thick beard. James is known by many as a notable musician in Seattle's jazz scene. And at age 24, he followed in the footsteps of his mother and grandfather on the Duwamish Tribal Council. There's a lot more to say about James, which I'll get to soon, and he'll also be rejoining us in a little bit. And finally, the 7th generation since Dr. Jack and his sister greeted the first white settlers to Puget Sound. James Rasmussen's niece, his sister's daughter, Christine Nelson, was the 4th generation of his family to serve on the Duwamish Tribal Council. And today happens to be her birthday. So happy birthday, Christine. The changes this family witnessed in the Duwamish watershed and in this region are incredible. And the family's adaptation and resilience are equally astounding. But they're not alone. Other descendants of Chris Canum, the descendants of Chief Sealth, and many others are still with us, as are the descendants of the first settler families. Many of them are actively influencing the future of Seattle to this day. This is certainly true of James. Just as his ancestors did, James has a way of forging alliances with people who are quite different from himself. I'd like to take a moment to tell you of one such story. In 1984, James met John Beale. John was a Vietnam War veteran who moved to the Duwamish Valley's South Park neighborhood in 1976. He suffered from PTSD, and at the age of 29, he had 3 heart attacks and was diagnosed as terminal. Maybe 6 months to live. His doctors recommended that he find a hobby he enjoyed and to make peace with his fate. John turned to the little semblance of nature that he could find in a deep ravine behind his house with a murky stream and thick blackberry bushes and piles of trash. But grateful for its quiet refuge that it gave him, he resolved to clean it up. He wanted to leave that little patch of nature better than the way he had found it, and he succeeded. And much of his story has now been told around the world. He also survived for another 30 years. The part of the story that's less known is the relationship between James and John. In 1984, John Beale approached the Duwamish tribe to ask for their help restoring salmon runs in the Duwamish River and its little tributary, his creek, Ham Creek in South Park. As the council heard him out, James was particularly impressed with John's passion for the river. The two formed a partnership that would transform both the creek and the Duwamish River in the coming decades. They worked together to focus attention on the river that had sustained John's family for generations, and the creek that James's family for generations, and the creek that John credited with keeping him alive. In 1990, they gained the support of the city of Seattle and King County to launch a public-private partnership called the Green Duwamish Watershed Alliance. And then in 2000, they recruited a broad-based coalition of Native, environmental, social justice, and neighborhood groups to create the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. By the time the EPA listed the river for cleanup in 2001, James and John were poised and ready to lead the charge for a river revival that would protect the health of all of the river's Native and immigrant communities. The rest, as they say, is history. In the years since, the river has been transformed from the dumping ground I discovered in 1994 to a place where thousands of volunteers have restored riverfront habitat long since destroyed. And the watershed's native people have also been undertaking a cultural revitalization of the river traditions, their resource uses, and their political leadership in this region. Over the years, they've been joined in their efforts by new waves of immigrants, fishing families, longshoremen, recreational river users, and many others, including countless numbers of residents living in the river's historic waterfront neighborhoods of South Park and Georgetown and Riverside. Many of these new immigrants and neighbors are now taking up the mantle of leadership for the river cleanup themselves. Paulina Lopez, pictured here, is a human rights law expert originally from Ecuador who chose to live in South Park because of its proximity to the river. She's recently become the newest director of the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition and says her focus is centered on the next generation. The wealth of Seattle was built on the back of the Duwamish River, she said in a ceremony right here at the Longhouse when she was being inducted into her new leadership role. Sometimes I feel like we're being crushed, but then I wake up in the morning and I see our youth, how much potential they have. When she sees that, she says, I feel like we're building a movement. I think the folks that can best give you some perspective on the human dimensions of the past, present, and future of the watershed are those folks whose stories are partly told in the pages of The River That Made Seattle. So without any further delay, I'd like to move into the next portion of our program and invite some of those folks to join us online now. I'm going to ask for the help of Kate Heacock from UW Press to start bringing them in. Okay, and let's get James back as well. Okay, for each of you that are coming in, I'm going to ask you to please start your video so that we can see you on screen. If you are able, I hope you are able. And if not, we may have to make them all co-hosts here. So, James, can you open your video again? There we go. Welcome back, James.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Louise Brown, I don't know if you have a photo or video you can share with us, but Louise is a descendant of the Maple family. You can mute yourself, Louise, but it would be great to see your face. Louise is a descendant of the Maple, who were one of the first settlers.
I can't find the,
And we've got some more coming in. There are so many people whose stories are touched on. I didn't want to exclude any of them if I didn't have to today. Okay, I believe that we are
there we go.
Oh, there's Louise, wonderful. You can mute yourself, please. Mute yourself, but keep your video on for now.
Got
Great, and Leanna Beale, John Beale's daughter, I believe, is also with us. She should be coming on screen in a moment. Welcome also to Christina Billingsley, here from the Port of Seattle. Let's see, do we have Amaranta on screen? Let's get your video on, Amaranta.
Hi. Oh, hello. I don't know if I can see you. Hello.
Okay, mute yourself, but turn your video screen on. And for those of you who are watching, if you go to gallery view in the upper right corner, you'll be able to see everybody as they come on screen. Hi, Leanna, I can see you now. Wonderful. Let's see, who else do we have coming in? Amaranta, you can turn your video on if you're able.
Sean Blocker.
Amaranta Sandis is one of the incredible artists who has been doing river-related artwork from the Duwamish Valley neighborhoods. And I believe if he turns his video on, we also have Sean Blocker from US EPA, who is the Superfund manager for this region. There he is. Thank you, Sean. Good to see you. Wonderful to see your face. The rest of you who have been invited in, please keep yourself muted, but turn your videos on. You should be able to find that in the lower left corner of your screen.
Okay, yes.
Okay. But mute videos on. Amaranta, hello. Wonderful, thank you for joining us. Okay, and thank you everybody for bearing with us. I know this is not the quickest process here, but it was very important to me to get as many of these folks in the room with us today as possible. We have a few more coming, I believe. Elsa Bowman.
Hi, look, here I am.
Wonderful. Elsa, could you mute yourself, but keep your camera on, please?
Okay.
You should have a mute button.
Yes.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Wonderful. We have a few more coming in. Let's see. Jonathan Hall should be on screen with us in a moment. Hello, Jonathan. Jonathan is the plant manager at Lafarge Cement, one of the industries on the Duwamish River that we write about in the book. We also have Sarah Cabbage, artist working in the area and one of the masterminds behind Duwamish Revealed. For those of you who saw that art installation several years ago, it was actually a couple hundred art installations over the course of a summer. And Paulina Lopez. Thank you for joining us today. You just heard a little bit about Paulina, South Park resident, who is the current director of the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. Let's see, we have a few more. Fiona McGuigan, the Duwamish Artist Residency. Hi, Fiona. I didn't read some of the passages from the artist section, but it's one of my favorite sections of the book. So I'm glad so many of you could join us today. And who else do we have coming in with us here? Alberto Rodriguez should be joining us in just a moment. Do we have, Alberto, you can keep yourself muted once you're able, but turn your video on, please. And the same for Andrew Schiffer. Alberto was the program manager for Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition for a little while, but now runs the Duwamish Valley program for the city of Seattle. And we also have Andrew Schiffer from Georgetown resident and representing Dirt Corps, which trains local folks to do environmental restoration as a career. And they have planted thousands, literally thousands of trees in the Duwamish Valley. We have Rosario. I don't see you on screen yet, Rosario. Rosario also, hi Rosario, is also a Georgetown resident, a one-time Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition staffer, and now works here at the Longhouse. And her family has been here for 5 generations now, if I remember correctly. And we now have Alberto on screen, wonderful. I think that might be everybody who is able to join us today. If there's one of you who I haven't mentioned yet and you're on screen, oh, Ken just joined us. Ken Workman, thank you so much for joining us. Ken is the direct descendant of Chief Seattle and will be joining me for another event for a more in-depth interview on Thursday of this week with the UW Bookstore and UW Press. We also were just joined, wow, it just keeps coming, this is great. Jim Meander from NOAA has done a great deal of fisheries research. So those of you who are science geeks out there who want to know more about that, all these folks are going to be available for discussion and questions as soon as we get them all in the room. And Cliff Villa. Cliff was the, hello Cliff. Cliff was the attorney for EPA as the cleanup plan for the Duwamish River was being drafted, and now teaches law, environmental law and environmental justice at the University of New Mexico. Did I miss anybody? If I missed you and you're on screen and I didn't see you come in, raise your hand so that I
Dan Cargill.
Where's Dan?
Dan is here, but he hasn't turned his video on.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you, Dan. Dan Cargill retired from the Department of Ecology. Dan was, aside from Lee Moyer, who I mentioned when I was talking, Dan gave me one of my very first tours of the Duwamish River. He is one of the few people, like James, who has been doing this work longer than I have. And Dan's primary job when he was with the Department of Ecology was controlling all of the sources of pollution to the Duwamish River. So we burnt him out, he retired, but he still keeps popping in. So thank you for joining us. Okay, is that it? I think that's it. I'm getting a message from Kate Heacock that she has brought in everybody who she could find. And welcome Kate. Kate from UW Press, who has been managing all of this behind the scenes for us today. So thank you.
Yay, my pleasure. I'm also very honored to get to read the questions to everyone. Thank you everyone for joining today. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A box, so I think we should just jump right in. I think everyone's really excited to learn more and hear from all of our panelists today. So I will start with a question actually about the Longhouse. I think this was from the tour at the beginning. How was it decided who slept in the back of the Longhouse and who slept in the front? And they're asking if you can describe the hierarchies.
Highborn people slept in the back of the Longhouse, which is the warmest and the driest place in the Longhouse. And those that were new to the village or to, to the Longhouse would be closer to the door. And yes, we did have a very class society. That is important to remember when we talk about Indian people here in the Northwest at the very least.
Thank you, James. So we have a question, I think a very important, relevant question, probably on a lot of folks' minds. How can we find Duwamish-owned businesses to support with our dollars?
I'm going to ask Paulina, I think, to take a first stab at that. Paulina, can you unmute yourself and talk about how to support Duwamish businesses?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I was muted. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you so much, BJ, for this wonderful opportunity to be part of your book and the history, and for gathering all the people that have made the Duwamish part of the history in their own lives and make a change. To answer it, I think I would go first to the Duwamish Longhouse to support. There is an amazing museum there, and a great way to learn more of the history, as well as supporting some native artists in there. There is another effort called the Duwamish Paying Rent that I would like to encourage folks to do. And as far as supporting nonprofits, organizations doing work on the Duwamish River, we also have our nonprofit organization, the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, that has been in existence since 2001, a 501c3. And there is many other efforts that folks around here are also representing. But I think this speaks of the different efforts that we have.
And can you also address if there's a directory of local businesses that people can support?
So not directly the Duwamish from Heritage, but in the Duwamish Valley, we have Georgetown and South Park businesses here in both neighborhoods in the Duwamish Valley. We have a lot of information too of these businesses in our website. Majority on the South Park side are people of color led. And the Georgetown side, there exists a lot of them as well. And so I would encourage you to come learn from this business, learn from the people, the history, that why they're here, and some of them have been here for generations as well. So it's a great opportunity to learn more about the neighborhood's history at the same time.
And Rosario, did you want to add anything?
Hi, my name is Rosario. I live in Georgetown. Thank you, Paulina, for your contribution to that answer. Yes, paying real rent supports the Duwamish tribe and the Duwamish Longhouse. I'm a staff member at the Duwamish Longhouse. There are Duwamish businesses. One is, that I can think of the top of my head, is in my big sister's shoes. She is a direct Duwamish tribal member. She is a family member of Cecile Hansen. That is her granddaughter. And then, like Paulina mentioned, it's important to support the local businesses located in the Duwamish Valley. And the best thing that I can recommend is ask a local what their recommendation is. And yes, we do want people to come to the Longhouse. Because of COVID, only our store is open. You must wear a mask. If you don't have one, we will provide one for you. If you guys have any other questions about the Longhouse, you can call our number, 431-1582.
Does anybody else want to direct?
Yes, I would like to add something, and Rosario can add to more of that. And that is, Georgetown has its own history and its own museum. And it is a very important place, and it is a very important history that people need to remember. And Rosario, tell people about that, please.
So I am a board member and now the president of the Fresno Georgetown History Museum. Because of COVID, museums can't be open till I think stage 3 or 4. So our efforts now are to provide for our community. We have multiple missions. One is the creative power of sharing history. Our 2 new missions is being on the right side of history. And our other mission is creating history. So you guys can also contact me later. I want to focus more on BJ's book, and thank you all for being here and for all your contributions to it.
All right. Thank you, Rosario. I have a question from Tiffany Elliott. She said the Stuck River flowed through what is now Sumner, and my community, Lake Tapps, was created by a diversion of water from the White River. Was there anything interesting that you learned about these communities while working on your book?
So I spent a fair amount of time exploring that area. I went down countless rabbit holes that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I couldn't put it all in the book. But I did spend some time exploring that area. I would actually, I cannot tell you detailed history of the Sumner area. I kind of cut myself off as after once a region of the watershed was diverted and was no longer part of the Duwamish watershed, I had to kind of put up a great big wall and say, okay, I'm not going to keep going down rabbit holes that direction. But what I would love is if you have some specific resources that you think are really relevant to that area post-diversion, and could put them up in the Q&A box or the chat box, I'd be really happy to share those out with everybody afterwards.
All right, one second. Sorting through the comments about when we had a little technical trouble at the beginning with the view. Hopefully now everyone can see everybody. I think that has been sorted out. Let's see, we have a question about Georgetown. Okay, from Karen Sandy. I'm very interested in tracing the original oxbows in the Georgetown and South Park and other neighborhoods. Is there an updated map in which the Duwamish River is superimposed onto a current map? And if so, where would she be able to find that?
Rosario?
We do have maps here at the Longhouse, and we have two different maps. And no, we don't. What I envision for Georgetown is maybe like a go-kart or something, and I can take people on the actual river route. So to be continued. I have ideas and things that I want to do, but yes, there is a map. You can't really walk it. Everything has been filled in, and not everything, but a lot of has been industrialized. But yes, you can come to the Longhouse and get one.
So the map was actually produced by Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition. It does show the overlay of the current and historical river routes and all of the public access and wayfinding information that you will need in order to do what you're asking as best as is possible today. As you probably know, much of this land is now industrial. That's why we created it. So a lot of it is private property and a lot of it has industrial or other facilities on it. But in those places where it is publicly accessible, the map will show you how to do that, yes.
And BJ, I would just like to encourage people who would like to receive some of these maps. We're happy if you can connect to the DRCC website and send your inquiries. We always like to encourage people to think and visiting these two communities that sometimes get forgotten in South Seattle. So please do come and let us know. We offer, usually not during COVID times, but we offer boat tours and walking tours around the neighborhoods, precise for that moment and reason because of the rich history both neighborhoods have. So we'll be happy to distribute those. And if you go to our DRCC.org website, DuwamishCleanup.org.
And this is the map here. And when you open it up, you'll see the overlay of the historic and the contemporary routes. Thank you, guys.
We have a question from Anna. Are there any landmarks left in and around the Black River or River Forks that can give you an idea of the tribal history of this area?
James, would you like to field that? Or Ken?
Deference to Ken, but many years ago, when some of the apartment buildings were being built over where what was the old Amish village site, I was alerted to it by state archaeologists and others. And as they were bulldozing the site, as we've heard here at P107, I was able to actually see the outlines of the longhouses, which crossed over the roads that were there down to the end of the railroad track, which was where the Black River used to flow. Now, they're not there anymore. Nothing is there anymore, except if you dig down and I've saw this because of what some of the people that were working on stormwater systems have done in that area. The Black River still flows. It flows underneath the ground, but it's still there. And it is important that we remember the importance of this place, not just for the people who are Duwamish descendants, but also for the people of Renton. You will find murals on the sides of buildings in Renton that depict the transit on the Black River with parasols and white dresses and men in straw hats. In the old days, when they would row with the tides to go from Lake Washington to the Duwamish River and the other way as well. So it's not there now, but we need to remember it.
Ken, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I sort of grinned, and maybe James can help me with this. With regard to landmarks and the old village site, I would go down to Fred Meyer in Renton and run out back. And you look at the cliff right there, because everybody knows that the Duwamish River Valley would flood every year, so you never build your longhouse down in a floodplain. So it'd be just off of the floodplain. So look for Fred Meyer, and you'll be in the neighborhood. There's burial grounds out there too, and I'm not going to tell you where they are. Seattle put streets right over the top of them. Some of those people are still not under the streets, but they're in the general area. And I asked a person that has recently passed exactly where this place was, and he pointed out exactly. And so the Duwamish people are still here. They're in the ground. Our memories are in the hills. And James was attesting to, he was there and he saw it. And so Fred Meyer in Renton, there's a landmark for you.
And I will just add, you can actually follow the road. You'll notice it's not straight. It follows the old river bend. The road was that goes around that Fred Meyer and past the apartment buildings. That road follows the old river bend. And then as it goes through a green belt, it begins to be reconstituted with springs. So you get a small trickle of the original Black River coming out where the junction is today. The same is true of Green Lake draining into Ravenna Creek. The level of Green Lake was dropped to create a park around it, and that dried up Ravenna Creek. But as you follow along the old route, it begins to be reconstituted. And by the time it gets down to Union Bay, there is a flow, goes under University Village and then out into Union Bay. So same with the Black River.
Hey, can I have a follow-on, BJ, with what I just said?
Of course, please.
The railroad tracks. Follow the railroad tracks. Railroads are generally built along river plains because rivers always follow the path of least resistance. So go down there and look at the railroad tracks and follow them, and you have a pretty good idea.
Yeah. I want to say one thing. I remember saying a few words about everybody I'm seeing on screen except for Elsa. Elsa, please forgive me. Maybe I did, but I don't remember specifically saying. Elsa Bowman, I failed to put her in context when I welcomed her. She is the descendant of the Ham family, who Ham Creek is named for. So also in the book, and also a very, very important representation of the history of the Valley. Thank you for being here.
I have a comment and then a question from David. He said, I was moved by BJ's presentation, and he asked, what are ways that a newcomer could get involved in water cleanup in Seattle?
I think maybe everybody on screen has an answer to that. I'm going to show a little favoritism or bias, I guess, and ask Paulina from Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition to begin, just for the short answer, because we'll probably kick it around a little bit.
Thank you for that question. I think it's very important that everyone in Seattle and the state care for our waterways. And so a good way to start doing that is get linked to organizations like the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition that we are in the day-to-day working in front lines with communities directly on educating our communities that live here and how to advocate for themselves for a better and clean river. We're also doing at the policy level, meeting with EPA constantly. So we always need good allies to understand and how to do this work. There is a good way to volunteer whenever we come back to regular cleanups and to make a difference through kayak tours that we usually partner with the Duwamish Longhouse, with our youth and other partners to be there on the river cleaning up and making sure that our communities as well as our river are clean and we have a good, healthy environment.
Thank you, Paulina. Andrew, do you have anything you might want to add?
Sure, thanks, BJ. Yeah, it's easier when we can do more volunteer events that are happening. But I guess there's a lot of places to visit and to look around to see sort of what's going on. We are actually about to start work on getting the Georgetown community more access to the Duwamish River through Gateway Park North and redoing that. So anyone who wants to go down and take a look at that park would be one way to see what's going on. And then once the virus situation changes and things get more under control, there's a wonderful, amazing event twice a year called Duwamish Alive. That's a wonderful way to get involved as well. So yeah, there's lots of volunteer opportunities like that.
Yeah. So I'll just remind folks, Andrew is Dirt Corps. You can check them out. John Beale's organization, I'm a Pal, is still being run by his daughter, Leanna Beale, who's online. That's another organization you can reach out to. If you want to say something about that, Leanna, feel free.
Hi, thank you. My name is Leanna Beale. I'm not doing as much as my dad did. That was his life. But I do try to educate children and educate them about the local Ham Creek. And I recommend Duwamish Alive, which is every April and October. And I recommend Dirt Corps. They are wonderful with working on the streams that go into the river. And I'm sure they'll have more opportunities as soon as the phases increase and that type of thing.
And Leanna and Elsa, I don't know if you have met in person or if you've seen each other in many years, but I'm really glad to see both of you here representing Ham Creek. So thank you both.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I think probably everybody on this call has a little something to say. I'll just maybe hit one or two more. You mentioned the children, Leanna. Amaranta, do you want to talk a little bit about how you involve people or how people can get involved?
Sure. You know, my role as a teaching artist, it's been wonderful, I will say, in the last 12 years, because that's about the age of my son. So right now I am working with the Duwamish Youth Group in creating a mural in South Park. And it's, yeah, as of today, I have paint on, working on today. So definitely, there's more to work, I believe as a teaching artist, an artist that beautifying open spaces. It's just a great way to engage youth, prevent crimes and educate. So yeah, it's been wonderful to work, to be working in South Park doing different projects. So yep, unfortunately, due to COVID, a lot of the classes that I offer through the both King County libraries and Seattle Public Libraries, they are just closed. So hopefully in the near future, I will keep you posted and how to attend, free, they're always like free classes. So for everybody. So happy to be there. Mm-hmm.
So there's lots happening, kind of in the nonprofit sector. There's also official government channels that you can work through to get involved. Alberto might have a couple other ideas about how to get involved. Alberto Rodriguez from the city's Duwamish Valley program.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, BJ, and thank you all for being here. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. That was exactly one of the things that I was thinking. You know, before I jumped into the government, local government or government aspect of things, you know, there is an amazing organization that does a lot of like sciencey and monitoring, water quality monitoring. It's called the Puget Sound Keeper. And they are fantastic. They're on the river, patrolling the river, making sure that things are being done the right way on our river, right? In terms of local government, of course, you know, it's like we work for you, the mayor of Seattle, and the city council works for you, and I work for you as a strategic advisor there. So keep an eye on the things that matter to you and reach out. You know, there's always an email, there's always a phone call, and help us do our jobs better by what's important to you.
And then the Port of Seattle has new work going on through Christina Billingsley. EPA, Sean Blocker's on the line. They have public hearings and meetings on the regular. So I'm not going to go through absolutely everybody because I know they all have something to say, but there's certainly plenty of opportunities. And reach out to any of the folks that you want to on here about following up for more. Kate?
Yeah, I have a specific question about the salmon restoration. How far along is it? Any success?
So I think there's a couple of folks here who could maybe touch on that. Jim Meander, do you have enough information on the state of restoration or other things you'd want to say about fisheries restoration?
Hi, BJ.
Hey.
No, not specifically. We still don't have a lot of data, and as you know, there's still a lot of cleanup going on. That's sort of the continuing story. We're hoping the fish recover over the years as the contaminant levels are reduced. The natural populations obviously will come back. And hatchery fish, we have a little bit of data, but not a huge amount. So it's a little early to say how that's going.
Okay.
And others online who may have some more specific information. I just don't.
Okay, thank you. So you've heard from a number of folks who have mentioned Duwamish Alive. That's a twice-a-year volunteer restoration event. There's also formal restoration projects going on, and Christina Billingsley, I think, might be able to tell you about a big one that just broke ground.
Thank you, BJ. It is an honor to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, and I've learned so much already. Just very excited about the book. Yes, the Port of Seattle just recently had an official groundbreaking ceremony for Terminal 117. It's a habitat restoration and public shoreline access space that'll be about 14 acres of shoreline restoration along the Duwamish River, and it's incredibly exciting. The reason we got to that as a port is because of community activism led by Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, led by residents of South Park, Georgetown, decades ago. So that is absolutely the reason we got to this, and it's beautiful. It used to be a Superfund early action site contaminated through asphalt factory back 100 years ago or so, and now it'll be this amazing community resource, ecological resource, also for kind of the green jobs lens that we're hoping to bring to the Port of Seattle's economic recovery work. So we're really excited about it.
Nice. Did we just lose Sean Blocker? I saw him as I was queuing folks up to address this question. Sean from EPA also can probably tell you a little bit, Sean, sorry to put you on the spot, about the relationship between cleanup and restoration, because it is part of the Superfund process.
It is part of the Superfund process. One of the things, we do not compel restoration in our cleanups. Our job is to go out and clean up the contamination, but through a process known as the Natural Resource NERDA settlement, which is basically a settlement between the stakeholders in the community outside of the EPA. People who pollute are obligated to restore what they pollute. So through these settlements that are done through the Department of Justice, People agreed to clean things up. The Port of Seattle proposed this as one of their settlements, but went above and beyond in what the restoration efforts are here. So though the Superfund program doesn't restore, we do try to do at least habitat mitigation when we can, and then we defer the restoration to the NERDA parties.
Yeah, so as a result, even though EPA doesn't run that part, once EPA has identified the need for cleanup and the responsible parties, they also then must do restoration as well as cleanup through NERDA. Yeah, thank you, Sean. And James, I think James wants to say something.
Since being part of the restoration panel for the Duwamish, Green Duwamish River, or what's called RIA number 9, which there's a lot of information you can find there. If you look at WRIA number 9, King County, you will find that. But I think one of the most important parts to remember is that this area right here, Kellogg Island and around Kellogg Island, is the last habitat.
Mud Island, James.
What? Mud Island, yes, absolutely correct. But if you look at a map today, it will be Kellogg Island. And the last bend of the river. And this habitat is probably more important for saving salmon here than anything else that we could do. And one other thing that's important for me to say, I look at this, all of the people that are on the screen right now, and I have relationships with almost every one of you. And it is so happy to see you here, to move forward in what we're trying to do. Even Sean. And although he has left us in some of the ways he was able to help before, it does not mean that he cannot come to my porch and have a drink. And
I will be back at my job August 7th as the section chief in charge of the Duwamish cleanup. So you didn't get rid of me, James. I just disappeared for a little bit.
Okay.
All right, Kate, do we have a couple more questions we might have time to field?
We do actually, kind of to follow up on what James was just speaking about, the Kellogg River. Mark is asking if it's a declared wildlife sanctuary, is it off limits to the public, and which entity is responsible for it?
Christina, do you have enough information to answer that?
I don't think I do.
I do. It's actually owned by the Port of Seattle, and it is very difficult to get to. Although it is not a wildlife sanctuary, it is something that it is very difficult to get to and to access. Therefore, it has worked wonderfully, especially for the birds and waterfowl in this area. And I think that this is an important place as far as the restoration of the river. And because we get at DRCC calls from Coast Guard when people get stuck on the island, because once you get off of your kayak, canoe, or rowboat, you will sink up to your hips in mud, and people get stuck there. And so we get asked the question all the time, and we refer them to the Port of Seattle. I'm sorry George is not here, because George could probably answer the question. George Blomberg, who's worked with the port for over 30 years, and is very important as far as restoration of T107 and Kellogg Island and all of that. So it is not designated, such, but access is very difficult.
And the shoreline on the mainland side is protected as an archaeological site, of course.
BJ, in thinking about the Duwamish River, what would you characterize as the best and worst ways that it exemplifies the story of Seattle?
I would say that its history, I don't know if it's the worst way that it exemplifies, but its history reflects the worst aspects of colonialism, the worst aspects of cultural appropriation, the worst aspects of environmental injustice, environmental racism. I mean, this is a place where, first with Native people and continuing today with low income and people of color and immigrant communities are just not valued and don't hold the power that the folks who are making decisions about how to use our lands and how to use our waters and how to use our resources have. One of the best ways in which I think it reflects Seattle is, you can see on screen right now, one of the best ways it reflects Seattle is the people who are on the screen who have given years, decades, lifetimes to holding the memory of this place, to making it better, and to being active every day and with every ounce of energy that they have to improve the health of their communities and the health of this river. So, you know, without the folks that you see on the screen, I wouldn't have much hope, but because of them, I really do. So, anybody else? Yeah, James, please.
Just like the Duwamish people are still here. The river is still here. And we all have to remember that. As Sean knows, the responsible parties like to call this the waterway. But it is connected to a river system. It is a river as far as the communities are concerned around it. They understand that. The river is alive. It's getting better year by year. And as we move forward, Rosario, what are you doing? We can't read that.
We are still here, it says.
Okay, yes, the river is still here. And without, and this is a quote from one of our gatherings, without a river, there isn't a people. Without a people, there isn't a river. That it is all of ours. It's not just Duwamish people, it's all of ours. And the more we all realize that, the better off I think we'll all be. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And one thing that I haven't heard a question about it yet, so I'll just kind of interject it. We're actually very fortunate in many ways, as Superfund sites go anyway, in that we have responsible parties, both public and private responsible parties, who are actually really determined and dedicated to this cleanup and are determined to make it work. And compared to many places in the country, that puts us far ahead of the game. There's, you know, the Port of Seattle is on here with us today. They're a responsible party. Lafarge Cement is on here today. They're a responsible party and they're actively participating and being part of the solution. I might kick it over to Jonathan in a minute to explain how. You know, we can move forward because we have folks that are responsible and motivated, and we're actually all talking right now. So this is not the first time that responsible parties and environmentalists, you know, are sitting around a virtual table together. They have actually been sitting around a table together. So because we haven't had a chance to hear from him yet, I actually, if you don't mind, Jonathan, I will kick it to you and just ask you, you know, why are you participating in these conversations? What is the perspective of you personally or of Lafarge in moving this cleanup forward?
Well, that's thanks for kicking it to me. I'm not sure I've got a clean answer for that, but I would say that you know, the last 10 years I've been here and leading the Seattle facility. We've been trying to find ways to reinvent ourselves and create a new path for ourselves after shutting down part of our operations. And frankly, the you know, being part of the cleanup as a potential responsible party has also led us to understand that there's opportunities there as well, and it's created some great ways for us to keep people employed, keep money flowing through the business, so it actually can be part of the PS. Dying businesses are hard to get money out of to help with the cleanup, and so these are ways that are they're actually fun and interesting to have a business-minded view of cleanup and participating in these sorts of things. So from the hip, hopefully that was good.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Kate, what's your feeling about time for questions?
I think we have time for a couple more. I think we're talking about kind of the present cleanup, and Dennis asked if anyone or any organization has created a long-term 50-year or longer restoration vision for the Duwamish River.
I'm gonna look around the screen to see if anyone's gonna raise their hands as saying that they have a plan that goes out that far. I'm not sure I've seen one that goes out 50 years, which is a shortcoming to be sure.
I would.
Alberto's kind of wobbling, shaking his hand, raising his hand.
No, but I would say that there are several people that could answer that question, and they might need to be pushed forward. Number one, Sean Blocker, and number two, Dan Cargill, who's been very quiet in this discussion, but is an absolute hero as far as this river is concerned.
Okay, so yeah, I do definitely want to hear from Dan. I'm looking for an opportunity to pull him in. But
I'm waiting for Dan to go first.
Plans, yeah, so plans for 50-year plans for restoration, anybody?
BJ, I give you the timeline for the cleanup, but it's not the rest.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You broke up a little.
So BJ, I mean, I can give out the plans for the actual cleanup, but that's not the restoration.
Right.
And that's something that needs to be developed and pursued for this river. Cleaning it up does not return everything to as much as we can. That has to be done through other means, and it is something that needs to be addressed.
Alberto, you were going to say something?
So, you know, work for the part of the city of Seattle that the non-potentially responsible party. Most of my work is not specific to the river and the river cleanup and the Superfund site, but more looking at community priorities and well-being and quality of life and anti-displacement more holistically, more generally. So, you know, we have been working and having conversations with other partners, you know, including the community, the Port of Seattle, King County, on how we can address climate and community resilience more holistically in a way that centers, you know, the voices of those most affected, that makes sure that we are proactively mitigating displacement pressures and not exacerbating, you know, the displacement pressures by bringing more parks or helping with food insecurity issues or bringing more mobility and transportation. So the river is part of it, and there will be restoration opportunities as we bring more access to the river, you know, hopefully more in Georgetown, as we do have some plans in South Park as well. So that sea level rise adaptation strategy, that community climate resilience will have to look at that time frame. But we are just delving and starting to focus or start developing something in partnership with the community and other partners.
Yeah. And NOAA runs the Natural Resource Damage Assessment Restoration Plan, and I'm not sure that it's a 50-year plan. Jim, if you have anything to add to that, you can. But there is a restoration plan for the river run by NOAA. Yes, Jim?
Yeah, it is a long-term plan. I wouldn't say 50 years, but they do have the long view of, usually with the NRDA process, damage resource damage assessment is identifying ecosystem services and loss. And then part of the settlement is actually restoring habitat. So buying acreage if it's available and restoring it as a functioning habitat. And that's long-term. That's the goal, is to have that habitat viable for the future. And I think there's safeguards in place to make sure it stays that way. But, you know, in the broader picture, you have to clean up the entire river. You can have nice habitat in these pocket areas, but if you don't clean up the major contamination, you're really not gaining that much ground. But yeah, that is a long-term goal.
BJ, I could add, the Port of Seattle in 2009 did create a lower Duwamish River habitat restoration plan. So if people do want to check that out, the port does have a plan for managing 70 acres of habitat under its jurisdiction. So that's useful, 2009 document.
Great,
you can Google it.
And because James tagged you, Dan, did you want to add anything? You're on mute. Maybe that's intentional.
Potential. No, outside of thank you for having me. It's been fascinating and wonderful to see so many faces again. Earlier there was a question about maps of the old river and the new river. On the Department of Ecology Lower Duwamish Waterway site for source control, there is a link to electronic documents. And at the beginning of that, you will find a map of the existing river and what it looked like beforehand, at least up to the Turning Basin 3. So that's part of it. And then the very first document that there is Richard Foster, Sources of Pollution in the Green Duwamish Watershed in 1945. So if you want to see where the river was in 1945, I would mention that almost every single site that's mentioned in there is now a state cleanup site or a Superfund site. And virtually all of those are in the process of being cleaned up by EPA or ecology. So you look at where it was, it's a wonder that there's anything living in the river. But it is vital. I think people are surprised when they see how much wildlife and how much habitat there is there, and have great hopes for the future.
Let's take one more question, and then I might want to, oh, Cliff, do you have something to say? I'm seeing something in the chat box from you.
Hi, I'm Sophia, and I just posted a quick response to one of the other questions in the chat box about the status of federal recognition for the Duwamish tribe. Can you hear me, BJ?
You're cutting out a little, at least for me.
Sorry. If you're interested in federal recognition for the tribe, there's a good law review article that you could find in the public domain right now. Will give you a sense of where we are at least 5 years ago. But unfortunately, the status, to my knowledge, really hasn't changed. It's still not a federally recognized tribe, even though it is the heart and heartland of Seattle.
So that's regarding the fact that the Duwamish tribe does not yet have federal recognition. Thank you, Cliff. Kate, I think maybe one more question, and then I might just want to ask a couple of my own of some of the folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet.
I actually have just an important logistical question, a comment from Kristen. There are so many extraordinary people and organizations interwoven within this good work for community and environment in the area. Is it possible to share contacts for the folks who are involved in this panel today? And then Kristen said, what a valuable resource collective.
I would be happy to do that. I will, most of these are nonprofits and government agencies that very much want people involved. So yes, I will make a point of making sure that happens. Thank you for that. There are a couple of opportunities we have because we're all gathered here that I don't want to miss. In my presentation, I told a little bit of the story of John and James, and particularly John's connection to Ham Creek. And as I mentioned also briefly, we have both Elsa Bowman from the Ham family and Leanna Beale from John's family. And I wonder if both of you could just share with folks from your very different perspectives what it is that you think is so compelling about Ham Creek and its story. Elsa, maybe we should start with you. You're on.
Yeah.
Up you go.
Yeah. I have been so honored and really overwhelmed at the way history has moved since my grandfather died. And I never knew him, but my mother grew up when the Duwamish was still arable. There were truck farms out there, and she had such happy memories. And taking her back, that we left in the early 50s, having lost everything really in the early 20s. My grandfather, I think, was idealistic, and I wished I'd known him. I cannot imagine that he would have believed and followed what had happened to the river, because he was a farmer, and I think he felt he was doing the right thing. In my heart, wish that he could have seen what happened. The John Beale story, when I took my mother back when she was in her 90s, and she lived to be 104, the creek had was gone, and the house where she grew up was gone. And I have some understanding of how it is when supposedly progress happens, and your history is gone. In my very small way, I have some way of understanding the devastating feeling. And to know that John Beale came back and was such a hero himself. And I did meet him once. I took my mother out there, and he was a wonderful man. And I'm hoping that Liana can tell me, because in researching my own family history, my understanding of the creek died when John died. And it was a very tragic story, because it seemed that his heart was broken at the end, because all he was working for seemed to have been ignored. And they were building a facility, right, for the city. So I'm hoping, and I'm glad now, that that's not the end of the story. And for me, John Beale is a hero, and I'm very grateful to him and his family.
Leanna, do you want to?
Yes, nice to meet you. I haven't been able to meet you in person. My father had said, before his passing, he did say, please don't let my dying die with me. And so he basically passed it on to me, and I was a little overwhelmed. I thought, gosh, I can't do anything that is the capacity he does, because he loved that creek so much, that was his child, that was his love, and his passion, and he brought it back to life. And so while I am not able to do what he was able to do in capacity, I'm able to partner with other organizations. We have, there was a spot called Point Rediscovery, where it needed some additional love and attention after my father had passed. And so we partnered with Dirt Corps to help. There was a sediment pond that had filled. It did its job, and it filled, and it needed to be cleaned out. And so partnering with Dirt Corps helped with getting that part restored back to a functioning creek. And, I partnership with DRCC, the Duwamish Alive, and I bring the story to college students and to elementary schools, and I take them to the different locations, the Mara Farm location, the City Light, Point Rediscovery, and I still tell the story and tell people, you can make a difference. It can be overwhelming. Just look down at your feet and start at your feet. I tell the kids, don't pollute. And when we were at the Mara Farm, they got all excited and started picking up all the garbage. So while it did seem that it died with him, it took some time, and I was able to complete and finish one of his restoration projects, and still do work with other organizations.
I do want to let you know that now that I found you, I won't let you go. And BJ, the amazing thing you've done, you didn't just write a book. You have started something that will live on beyond all of us. And I've rarely been involved with a researcher like you. I get tearful about it, because it's a huge commitment that you've made to our river, and I thank you.
No, I thank you so much. There's another story that we don't have time to go into it in depth, but I do want to just bring Louise Brown and Ken Workman forward for a moment, because they are meeting again, their families, I should say. I mean, they have met once or twice, but their families are meeting again after, I believe, 5 out of the 7 generations since white settlement here, maybe 6 out of 6 generations perhaps. And both of them I want to mention for those of you who want to kind of continue to explore. Louise and Ken will be joining me for a much smaller panel interview on Thursday through UW Bookstore. But Louise and Ken, do you want to just explain super briefly about how your families first originally met?
Sure. Grandpa, he stood on the shore down there at Alta in 1851, and he said, Flaleo Louise Adisha Padata Duwabs. I just inserted Louise's name there because he really didn't use her. That was him just saying, hey, come ashore, my friends. Come ashore to pass it, Adisha Padata Duwabs, Ata Lok Duwabs, which simply means, come ashore, my friends, onto this ancient land of the Duwamish Guyid. This word, it means welcome. So today, as Duwamish people, we recognize the world's real small. So we say, Wigwi hidak bak te atatita befo kiti da skoiswa tufted, Wigwi hidak adisha padate lok Duwams. Which I'm sure everybody understood exactly what I said, which is simply welcome everybody. We recognize the world is small, and so we say, welcome to the whole world onto this land of the Duwamish. So as Duwamish people, we invited these strangers onto this land in 1851, and a little bit of years before that with Louise. She likes to say that she was here before the Dannies, so there you go. So we still say that today, and so that's our connection.
Certainly do say that. Actually, what I wanted to share part of, because this is all about the river and the Duwamish, I have a painting copy behind me that represents that date in 1851, where a couple of my ancestors actually came with Chief Seattle in Duwamish canoes with their Duwamish guides. I did not learn about this information until 1994. And since then have, of course, been involved with Duwamish, where I've met James and Ken and Cecile. I got involved with the Pioneer Descendants of Seattle, and we assisted with the fundraising initially for the Longhouse. I've served on the board for the Duwamish, and I've spent the last about 14 years working with the Tukwila Historical Society, where the original painting of this painting is hanging, and where I met with BJ and got to share some of those stories that told the stories between the Duwamish and the early settlers. It's become a point of pride. I don't look at the river or Elliott Bay or even the city of Seattle the same as I did before I learned about the connections between my family and the Duwamish. It's a very point of pride for my family.
Wonderful. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I mentioned earlier that one of my personal favorite parts of this book to write was a section about the arts that have come out of people's reactions to this river. So kind of as one of our last little bits here before 4 o'clock, I'd love to have Amaranta, Sarah Cabbage, and Fiona McQuiggan just tell us why you do art about a trashed river.
It's still alive.
Yeah, and I think everybody has a personal story of why you want to do that. And I happen to grow up in an industrialized part of Mexico City, and the playground was open sewage. That's where I grew up. So move forward in Seattle, my second place, I had this great opportunity to restore, to work with the youth, and to, just do through my art just some positive changes, and that's what I do that, and I continue to do that, and I don't think I can stop. Mm-hmm.
Well, BJ, thank you for this. You know, I think it was about maybe 12 years ago, you turned to me at one point and said, you know, Seattle doesn't end at Pioneer Square. And I think it was one of the reasons we started the Duwamish River Artist Residency. And now we go every year down to the river and we spend 8 days on the river. Sue Danielson and I founded it in 2012. So we've been doing this for nearly 10 years. And it has changed my view of the city. And I just, there's so many voices on the river. And yeah, it has changed how I view my city, how I view myself. And I look at all those people here, and I could have never experienced this without walking down to the river. So thank you.
You know, something that Amaranta said, and hi everyone, thank you for BJ for writing this book and bringing us all together here. But Amaranta, your experience sort of echoes my own, coming to Seattle from a place back east, and you know, the colonial sort of the layers of the colonialism are just buried, so they're deep, and things, it's hard to see what happened to the landscape 300 years ago. And you come out here, I came out here, and it's just so much more raw, and that there's still visible in the landscape some of what used to exist before white settlement. And that to me was just fascinating, and that it coexisted alongside these incredible industrial installations. And it struck me as a very difficult place, but also a very hopeful place. And so the coexistence of those things and that complexity has just been fascinating. And just that, you know, in the short time that I've lived in this city and been hanging around by the river, that the amount of change that I have personally witnessed also makes me very hopeful. So makes me want to stay and keep exploring.
And I should also acknowledge Jonathan Lafarge, who played host to the artist Duwamish River Residency and has really helped to support some of the arts focus on this area. So thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you.
I think we had an opportunity to at least say hello to everybody on this call. We're 2 minutes from 4. James, Ken, Rosario, if you'd like to say anything at all to close us out of visiting with you at the Longhouse today, please do.
For any questions about the Longhouse, you can just call me. I'm at the front desk, 206-431-1582. We have BJ's book too for sale.
Yes, and if you purchase it here, in addition to all of my proceeds, which are being donated to Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition and the tribe in equal measure, if you purchase it here, then instead of your local bookstore, proceeds also go to the Longhouse. Both are worth supporting, but the ones that the Longhouse has are signed.
And probably just to close, it is so wonderful to see all my that is a wonderful thing to be able to see all of the people that I've worked with for many years on this. You know, people like me, and Dan and others that are on the south side of our careers, maybe, but also for people like Paulina and others and Christina that are on the upside of their careers, that this is something we are passing on to you. It is important. Louise, it's very good to see you again. It has been a long time. And so, and Cliff, we see each other all the time on Zoom meetings, but your input has been invaluable on a legal side for the Duwamish River. And Dan, I cannot say how important you are to the work that has been done here and everything else. And even having Andrew, Jonathan, Alberto, I taught you everything you know. Ken, I cannot even get a quart of what you have in your head as far as Duwamish people are concerned. And Paulina, I love you, and you run our organization now, and you're taking it into the future. And Liana, you know I love you. And even for Amarada, I've seen your work, and I know you've worked with our kids, and it's been wonderful. And Sarah, you know we've worked together over the years. It's just so wonderful. And Rosario, bless you. You know, you wound up in a good place, and I'm so happy for you. But almost like Alberto, I taught you what you know. And
My mama taught me.
yeah, right. Yeah, right. And for people like Jim and others that I might not know so well, our paths cross. And it's not that I'm the end all be all, because I'm not. Because the river is never an end all be all. As BJ says, you can step in a river and you will never step in the same place twice. It's ongoing. It's always ongoing. And we have a battle to fight. As far as our next election is concerned, and we all need to be involved. We need to be involved with answering your goddamn census and wear the goddamn masks, please.
All right.
People, do the right thing as we move forward. With that, thank you, BJ.
Thank you. Ken, would you like to say goodbye? Last word.
Sure. A little while ago, there was a question asked about the river, the good and the bad. And I would offer this, that if you think of the river as a living thing, a living person, that the river flowed for thousands and thousands of years in its meandering course. And then there was the changers came, the white people, and there was the forced assimilation. And so the river was straightened into this water thing. And now the river's being restored by all these people. They recognize that the river needs to come back. And very much like the Duwamish people, where we were forced, you know, we lived in a way and then we had to assimilate, and now we're being recognized. And so it's wonderful that the river is being cleaned up and that the world is changing, and they're recognizing the value of this river. And so this would be the cultural awakening of Seattle, and this would be the cultural awakening of the people, that they're recognizing this living entity and trying to help it come back to life again. So that would be my parting comment. And it would be thank you, my friends, for your heart. For your big work.
Real Rent Seattle, Real Rent Seattle, Real Rent Seattle. One.
Okay. Well, Douglas Hake with Todd, a Real Rent Seattle. So thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful to see you again. And thank you for your good work. This river's coming back to life. And BJ, thank you for your book. It's an easy read. It's a fast read, and it's just packed with data. This is the good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, PJ.